right, so let's go back just to look at a few of the teams that you guys played in '07. Let's talk about Kennedy and the rivalry there and what those games were like for you, because I know they were always packed and full of energy.
Mm-hmm. You know, Kennedy was never the most talented team, but they were always scrappy. You always remember them just running and diving on the floor because it was their game. You know, they could play Rosemont and it would just be a normal game, but when they were playing Jefferson, there was always that city animosity. You know, we were the better side of the city, and they beat us that year. And you know, they had some good players, but they just played hard.
Yeah, they had 3 to 4 good players: Fong, Alfred, Carlton, and Hakeem. And those 4 they're juniors that year, all athletes. And then, you know, they could shoot the ball. And there's always, like Cole's saying, there's always a little step up in the game when it's Kennedy. You know, you go over there. I personally don't like their gym. It's always kind of, you know, tough to play in. And people are ready to play. So that's why I love the Bloomington battle. And here, you know, you always have a full crowd. And it's always fun to play. I always looked up for those games. You know, those are always the fun games because you knew it was going to be a packed crowd. And there was a little edge between us because, you know, we weren't friendly off the court. You know, have some, you know, closer cities you played AAU with and you are kind of close with. But it was good as a healthy kind of competition.
Yeah. And over here, Grant Erickson pulled us through with a couple big threes. And, you know, just mentioning another teammate, you guys recall his efforts that game at all?
Yeah. No, I mean, he was the kind of guy he was a point guard in front of me, and so being how smart he is. I mean, he's unbelievable. I mean, you could name a play, and he'd walk it through with me and explain it to a detail. So that game, I think it was senior night here, and he just went off down the stretch. Made some big shots, had a great assist, I think, to you, maybe an alley-oop or something like that. And I think 2 big shots right down the stretch that really kind of set it so it wasn't, you know, maybe 7-point game or whatever it was. So it was good to see that on senior night, especially for Grant. I think he did a good job. Yeah, it was fun to see.
So then let's move on to, we talked about the Apple Valley games. We lost down there. We beat them here. And then we come to the last season finale. And it's to ensure that we share the conference and get a conference title. I look back and I remember that game. I remember you catching the ball in the elbow and you had a counter move and you went right down the lane and dunked it. It's on the highlight film. And then you were pretty animated after that. You could tell that there was a fire in you that you really wanted to take this team somewhere.
It was knowing that was at the end of what we really wanted to start. You know, the regular season, we wanted to play well and we wanted to do things, but really at the end of the season was what we wanted most of all. We wanted to get through sections, and we ended up doing that, and then we got to the state tournament, and we wanted to win 3 games in the state tournament. And, you know, that first game, kind of like we talked earlier, we got matched up against Apple Valley, and they beat us by 2, if I remember right.
Yeah, it was by 2.
Yeah.
So we close out Burnsville and we get a Dinah down in Shakopee for the region first game. And I remember the atmosphere was pretty electric and jam-packed, and we took care of them. I remember you had a few shots you threw out into the stands out there. And then we come up against Shakopee up at Wayzata, and they had a really good player by the name of Eric Carlson, some other players there. And you guys wanted me to just throw a few highlights from that game out at us?
Well, I mean, I remember I played with Eric a little bit in AU, and, you know, he's one of those guys that just kind of, it was the last hurrah for him. It was senior year. They wanted to win. We wanted to win, and you have those games, and those are, looking back at it now, 10 years later, are the most fun times to look back at because, you know, earlier in my high school career, we didn't really advance throughout the playoffs much. And then those last 2 years are kind of those games that you remember the intensity. It was kind of the Eden Prairie and us game, or when we played Kennedy, the gyms were always packed, and there was kind of always that energy.
I remember vividly those 2 games, especially the going to Shakopee. The first game, kind of my first playoff game in sections, and you don't know what to expect. You see doors. I mean, we walk through that gym, and it's already packed house. And, you know, you just, the adrenaline, you kind of get goosebumps walking through it. So kind of the first round of the basketball, you know, playoffs, I got really excited about. And then we played really well that game, and then we played Shakopee, and that was a tougher game. I think we kind of had intentions. These seniors are playing really well of kind of going in. And they battled pretty tough at most of that game. But yeah, those were two very fun games. And then the Burnsville game we'll probably talk about next. That was the most electric game. Minnetonka game at Burnsville.
Yeah, and you guys defensively were tough. I mean, because of your size in the middle, I mean, you could basically take the lane away. I remember Coach Gerbert East was just saying, God, he's just, a monster in there. And then it allowed you guys to take care of the perimeter maybe a little bit easier, too.
I think it gave us a little more flexibility to be able to, go after a little more steals.
Be a little more aggressive.
Be a little more aggressive, just because we knew we had backup and they tried driving a little more in the lane. Mm-hmm. So that was always nice.
So we get to the Minnetonka game, and they had upset Hopkins.
Yeah, and Hopkins was another.
Blake Hoffheimer coming up through AAU, and they upset Hopkins, and Minnetonka's pretty much of a junior team, and an unbelievable atmosphere.
Yeah.
I mean, unbelievable.
I think the fire marshal was kicking people out of the gym because everybody, the whole baseline and everything was just, there was no room.
That's one I remember. The bus pulls up and there's a line out the door. And you're walking through the line, outside the line. You get in, they had the old wood bleachers, the glass windows, and people on both sides just watching. That was incredible. One of the favorite games I've ever played in.
And I remember the way that they defended you. I mean, it was sometimes 2-3 fouls before a foul was called. I mean, they were hanging all over you, and do you recall that evening?
I remember that was kind of the game plan for a lot of teams. I was a lot bigger and a lot stronger than other teams, so me going up and me having an arm like this, most of the time they wouldn't call it, because I was able to get through it. But when you have 3 guys hanging on you, it's kind of hard not to call a foul. And it was one of those physical games. I remember afterwards when we won, it was just kind of like, man, I'm so happy we won the game and now we're in state, but also I am exhausted.
Yeah, and their guards could shoot.
Mm-hmm. Anthony Tucker, I remember a few of those shots, didn't even look at the rim. Just turned around and shot and nothing but net.
Just come down, transition, and just,
yeah.
I mean, it was probably that and the Apple Valley game was the 2 games that I look back at and just remember.
Before we get to the state tournament Apple Valley game, 2 players I'd like you guys to talk a little bit about. And you guys can talk about both of them one at a time, whatever. We're Aaron Barmore and John Mays. I think up until the middle of the season when we were 7-5, just a little bit over 500, we struggled with floor leadership. I mean, I know you were always you did everything for us. You were in the middle of the floor to get the ball and break the press. We leaked a guy out and you'd fire it long. But to get the guys, to make really good decisions in the right places on the floor, I think, Aaron played a large role in that. So, Johnny, you guys want to maybe speak to that?
Yeah, they did a good job of
you, Ellis, I should say.
Yeah, well, they kind of guys you look up to, and they did a good job. If the ball, if the press was struggling with the press, they would be the guys that give me the ball. I want the ball in my hand. I'm going to make sure it gets done the right way or gets done. And so they always stepped it up when they needed to. John Mays, vocal leader, always telling people what to do, and then Barmore, he's always not afraid to get his shoes dirty, and so those 2 guys really stepped up as far as the vocal sides on the guard side. Because Aaron kind of played 4, and then he kind of started playing a little 4-3-2-1 at times. So he was very versatile, and whatever you guys threw at him, he would be willing to do.
I just, I think those guys, and Ellis will contest to this, is some of our best friends. 2 guys that I didn't play long with Barmore as a teammate, but Mays growing up from 5th grade, playing AU and summer and traveling and over the years and years, he's one of the best guys around. Both of them are. I mean, they would go out there. Barmore is one of those kind of the scrappy, talented, but would just kind of like to go out there and just kind of hit people. And he never really played football, but that was just kind of his game.
Yeah, you guys didn't back down because Minnetonka was up in the faces of you guys all game long, and then we'd go right back at them, and it was just an extremely physical game. Going back now to after the Burnsville game, I remember you guys went down to KSTP and were on the Ann Hutchinson show. Okay?
I do not remember this.
You don't remember this?
No, I don't.
Okay. And
Hopefully it's good.
You were interviewed. You were interviewed, and I remember sitting there because we were out at a restaurant, and it was me and Nagin and my wife and Aaron Walton, and you turned to the mic and you said, "We're going to win the state tournament. We're going to the state tournament." And this was before regions, and I thought, "Oh my God!" But you really believed that, didn't you?
I did, because I knew we were the best team in the state. You know, maybe record-wise, we didn't have the best record, but I knew what we had as a group. We were the best team, and we had kind of proved it towards the second half of the season of making that large run and kind of overcoming the adversity that we had in the Tonka game. And then, you know, we hadn't been to state in 6 years prior, I think it was 5-6 years, and I just kind of wanted that. I wanted that for our group of guys, and knowing that I had never experienced it and never really even had an opportunity other than my sophomore year to get there, I wanted to make sure that we got there, and then when we got there, we won it.
And so now we'll talk about the Apple Valley game. So we get to the state tournament. You're in what I feel is the greatest venue in the state for basketball. The 4A schools do not get to play there anymore, but just an incredible atmosphere. Did you kind of feel that maybe there were some people around that hadn't seen you play that wanted to come out and see you that day?
Yeah, a lot. You know, the state tournament is always the kind of the showcase. You have a few different Christmas tournaments, Bethel, and a few others that kind of maybe you're able to be exposed to some of the other people around the state that aren't on the south suburbs that normally would see us. But it was kind of like, if you're a player, you're in a state tournament. And, you know, I always think of like Isaiah Dahlman and Blake, and I think St. Thomas went to the tournament a few times with Bryce Webster. Kind of odd names like that were some of the best players in the state. And I knew I was the best player in the state, and I wanted to make sure that everybody knew that.
So you guys walk in, I mean, the lower bowl's full, and you know this is going to be a wild atmosphere. And so the game starts and we get going. Apple Valley, I think, used about 8-10 guys.
They're deep, yeah.
They rotated in, I think, more guys, kind of did waves at us and stuff like that. But you played with some of those kids.
I played with Aaron Ford, knew McGuigan a little bit.
And so I always kind of felt that they, especially with Aaron Ford, since he had played against you so much, that he maybe knew a nuance or two.
Yeah.
And he could get a shot over you. And do you remember that in particular at all or anything like that?
You know, a little bit. I remember the battling and just going back and forth as our team did. And down the stretch, I think, trying to think of it was within a minute left in the game. We ran at a line out of bounds. And I was second or third in line, so, you know, the first two kind of broke. And then I remember Moses cut through the lane and just missed an easy bunny. Just didn't go in. It kind of rimmed out a little bit. And I remember, I think we were down one, and it would have put us in the lead. And I don't remember how much time was left, but that was kind of like we needed that bucket. It just rimmed out, and we just couldn't quite get over the hump after that.
Yeah.
Anything down the stretch you recall about that?
Yeah, I mean, you always look back, we coulda, woulda, shoulda. In that game especially, too, kind of as a season ender, your thoughts go, oh my gosh, there's so many things we could have done. Atmosphere you kind of spoke on earlier, which was tremendous. You know, we sat in the corner, watched games ahead of you, get excited, going that we got put in a smaller locker room there.
I think it was a closet.
It was a glorified closet.
Like the janitor closet.
It's a big closet.
I thought, you know, we were probably going to go to the big gopher locker room, and we got thrown in a closet, but no, it was
literally like you could probably touch one side of the other, and you put 18 high school kids in there, just stinky and wanting to have their own space.
But they were tough. I mean, the screens they set were hard screens. They had athletes. McGuigan, I think, had a heck of a game.
Yeah,
he couldn't miss a shot.
33, I think it was.
I mean, they had Varmasoni, who was football player of the year at one point, but he was fast. I mean,
Public.
yeah. I mean, they were a talented team, no doubt, and they were tough. And playing team, was that the third time we played them?
Yep.
And that's tough to do. I mean, everyone knows each other very well. You're starting to get each other's tendencies, and it's always tough to play each other 3 times.
Well, I mean, every game was down to the wire.
Yeah.
And, we were up 3, I think, with about a little under 2 minutes left, and we had some turnovers down the stretch there. But the last shot.
It was about 3 inches right. Man, maybe not even 3 inches.
Yeah.
I took it from I think a foot inside half court, and the rim, it just like, boom. And we were down 2, and it would have won the game. It was kind of just a desperation
Is that
heat.
first 3 of your game?
Yeah, I think even now, I think going back, I've shot 1 3 in the NBA. And it was a preseason game against Boston in Mohegan Sun in Connecticut. It was preseason, so it didn't technically count, but...
You made it?
No, I didn't. It literally, I mean, if this is the front of the rim, it literally went went straight. I barely nicked the rim.
So I'm going to ask you guys this question. We're closing on the 07 year. As you were coming up in 04, the program had a lot of success, 2000, 2001, 2, 3. And, you came in 07, and did that play in your minds as motivation for you guys to want to achieve that level? You'd seen it before. You were a part of it before. Then again in 09, did it foster anything within you to motivate yourself to get there?
Yeah, there's a few things that kind of led to that. First, I remember my mom took me out of school to go watch Socorro play. I think it was like South Center when you guys made it state. And so I remember coming out of school, and that got me excited. And that's kind of made me breed Jefferson blood. I remember 7th grade sitting on the bench as a water boy, handing these guys, and these guys you look up to, Matt Omi especially, because I played point guard, so you always followed him all the way through. So those kind of the 2 things leading up to it, and then the success they've had. I remember looking up at the banner saying, all right, I have 3 years here, possibly playing varsity. They've gone almost, I think it was 4 of 8 or no, 3 of 6 at the time I came in. I go, there's some tradition there that I want to be able to, set my expectations for. So they set the expectations on my behalf that, this tradition is there.
Mm-hmm. I would kind of correlate it to my time getting to Kansas, where you didn't want to be that team that was not good. You have a great history for so many years, and my sophomore year, my freshman year we were about 500, and my sophomore year probably a game or 2 or 3 under 500. And those kind of years eat at you, knowing that even though I was still 14, 15 years old, holding up, seeing the older Augustine and the Wheelers and those guys, you wanted to do what they did. And maybe I didn't realize how hard it was at the time, because making those long runs into the postseason they're hard, especially in the late conference. It's not the classic Lake in that sense of they had 2 teams, and those teams kind of fought each other, and then they had a good chance at getting into the state tournament.
So do you guys think that makes it easier? I mean, you got to have talent first. I mean, you got to have talent, you got to have some chemistry, you got to have work ethic. But do you think it makes it easier to take that step if you've seen it before, you've been there before?
Yeah, I would agree.
I think it's a slippery slope. I think you've been there before, but you get complacent and say, "Oh, we've been there, we've done it before." But I think you need to, now you've been there, you got to kind of take a step back and say, "How do we get there?" And watching these guys who work ethic and ahead of you, that's how they've done it before. That's what we've done it before, and now we know kind of the rules.
Yeah, you kind of know the formula in a little sense, but I would agree that you kind of do get a little complacent, but you also get to a point where you're like, man, we made it to second round of regions. Like, we have to get it to that final game, and then we got to get and win that game and get to the state. And I think I may be speaking for you, but when we got there my senior year and your sophomore year, it kind of gave you that like, oh, okay, this is what we can do now. And